Hi, everybody. Marty reminded me of something in the episode I did on did Jesus reference to the new wineskins do away with the law? And our point was to say no. And I dealt with all kinds of other issues, and I actually never actually went through the whole verse and described what it says and why I said that. So Marty writes me, "Did I miss it? I listened twice. What does the wineskin parable mean? You discussed, you digressed back to Paul. Anyway, so oops, I forgot to explain, and I probably was trying to do too much while I'm getting ready for trial. So by the way, I got a 19-day reprieve. We were scheduled to start on Thursday, this more or less yesterday morning or yesterday afternoon, and it didn't happen. And the judge had a jury trial that came in conflict. So now we've got 19 days off. So I will be doing maybe a few more videos in the time being. But sorry, Marty, but thank you so much for bringing it to my attention. Okay, so we're going to use Bill Mouncey's translation here. It's more authentic. The King James, for example, said if you pour new wine into bottles, uh, in old bottles, they'll break, and that's just like doesn't make sense. Just putting in old new wine into old bottles would cause them to break. But if you use the exact word there in Greek, if you put new wine into old wineskins, yes, the new wine keeps growing in its size and its fermentation inside the bottle, and it can break the old wineskin because it's gotten more taut over time. So it's just tell people the historical facts behind the thing. Don't use something that doesn't make any sense in English. Putting new wine into an old bottle wouldn't make an old bottle crack, right? Okay, so anyway, we'll take a look at this. In It's interlinear from Mouncey, and it's at BibleWayGateway.com if you wanted to look it up yourself. Neither is new wine poured into old wineskins. If that happens, the wineskins split, the wine pours out, and the wineskins are ruined. Which wineskins? We're going to pause there. The old wineskins are ruined. So by putting new wine into old wineskins, you cause ruin to the old wineskin. So you don't do that. Instead, new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. Does that mean? What is the two things that are being preserved? Well, go back and look at what was ruined. So in Greek, how do you know meaning? I've mentioned this before. You look for antithesis. So what's the antithesis of the word ruined in the sentence that follows? Ruined is over here. What's preserved? The opposite of ruined. That's antithesis. And by the way, antithesis is used in a lot of languages. English even does it. If you want to make something more clear, use antithesis. You can do it in even in Latin, but it's very well-known skill of rhetoricians in Greek. They did this to make sure the meaning of their words were absolutely clear, what they mean in the sentence. So that's the key. That's a key. And remember, there's no punctuation whatsoever in Greek. So if you looked at the Sinaiticus online, go to sinaiticus.org. You want to see what Greek really looks like? It's all the letters all strung together with no space. So what do they have is clues. They don't have commas. They don't have semicolons. They don't have paragraph structure. The only thing they have is antithesis to help direct the reader to understand meaning. So the wineskins are ruined if you put in new wine. Old wineskins would be ruined. But how can you preserve the old wineskin and the new wine when you put if you want to preserve it? The solution Jesus gives is to put the new wine into new wineskins. So I'm going to read my note here at the bottom. Jesus is concerned about putting new wine, his teachings, into the old wineskin. Let's say law and prophets. So maybe Jesus is saying, don't put my writings, my words into the law and prophets. It should stand on its own separately. And he may have a reason. We'll see why, which will ruin the old wineskin. So if you try to put the prophet speaking, so remember Deuteronomy 18 is a prophecy about the prophet, and every word he says, God will hold everyone accountable to read and be obliged to do it. Think about how God intended that. That is truly a universal covenant. And in fact, when you go over the new covenant, it's God's going to put my law on their hearts. And Jesus is going to tell us how the Gentiles will have the law put on their hearts. And it was my Torah. God said my Torah. And Jesus does that in Matthew 19, Luke 16, about saying, how do you have eternal life? Obey the commandments. And he starts reading off the 10 commandments. And that was what our prior episode, and I got a little too distracted. I didn't discuss the parable that's involved here, but that's why that's important. So that's where Jesus is going. He's trying to say, I have this new scope, which is intended for the Gentiles. It's to be broadly applied, and it's the Ten Commandments. But what else? See, there's I've counted about 120 commands of Jesus. They're all beautiful. They're all great. They're wonderful to read, and they're good and one just brilliance to read. So it is a there is the original Torah is he's incorporated, and he's gone beyond with all these explanations, and he'll tell you a bird can't fall to the ground without the care of God, and help. These are all kinds of things that are not necessarily commandments, but also the nature of God, his love of animals, for example, in that example I just gave there. So let's keep reading here. So how do you preserve both the old wineskin, which I am saying is the law and prophets probably, and the new wine, which is his teaching? How do you preserve both of those? The answer is put the new wine in a new wineskin, and thus the old wineskin and the new wine is preserved. You see the point? So if you twist this and you don't pay attention to the antithesis, people are going to say, "Oh well, he was okay with letting the old wineskin be destroyed, and he just wants to preserve the new wine and the new wineskin." That's how some people like to read it, but that doesn't fit the sentence, nor does that fit anything else Jesus taught. And just let me say this: if anything Jesus said was an apostasy, meaning if he was turning you away from listening to the law of Moses, which God says 16 times, Yahweh says 16 times, it's the law eternal for all generations. So while human beings have children, generations, that law will continue. And Jesus said the heaven and earth will not pass away until the law will not pass away until the heaven and earth passes away. And Jesus said, when that passes away, he gave a special lesson on that there's no more giving and taking in marriage. So that's when it all ends, at that end of time, when the heavens and earth are rolled up. Okay, so I hope that explained the idea that now we need to go back to what caused all this. I'm going to go back to Nick's comment. We'll see what he said. All right, so this was intended to all address the comment that's in the white box there, that according to the way Nick was construing the parable, he was alluding to it. He didn't quote it, didn't give his reference, but it was the passage we're looking at. So Nick says, trying to live by the law of Moses while saved and following Christ is like trying to put new wine into old wineskins. It just can't work. And that's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying you want to preserve the law, you want to preserve the new teachings. The way to do that is put them into different wineskins. And my interpretation of that is exactly what we see with the new covenant scripture. It's in a separate book. It shouldn't be put in the same book with the other books. And there were three of them. So there was the law that had its own scroll. Then the second book was the prophets, and it was put in its own scroll. And then the third book was the writings, and it was its own scroll. And it's explained that each had tiers of authority. The law came as number higher than the prophets, and that's in Numbers, I think it's 12 or chapter 15, where God tells Miriam and Aaron, who said, "Hey, we're equal to Moses." He said, "No, you don't understand. I talk Moses face to face, and I talk to all the other prophets. All the other prophets in visions and dreams." And the situation, though, is when God tells Moses, "I'm going to have a special prophet who every word he'll speak." It was obviously God was calling him the prophet to come instead of a prophet. And this was somebody who would be special and unique and would be basically every word coming from that person. God said, "I'm going to hold account everyone to obey." And then therefore, that's a universal prophet. All the earth would have to listen. So the Ten Commandments Jesus incorporates in his message, but also then he has over 100 special commands where they're all good. It's not, nobody's ever complained about anything Jesus has ever taught that I know. That I'm not going to go through all that right now, whether people had complaints or anything, but I find everything he says is extremely wholesome, beneficial, true, and said in such beautiful things you can easily remember them. So that's why that needs to be put in a special book. It's a unique way of speaking. You will not find Moses talking like Jesus. You will not find any other prophet talking like Jesus. Jesus is a unique individual in world history, and perhaps the greatest mind of all time in a human being, who he said, "I'm indwelled by the Father, and the words you hear are not mine." So there probably is a reason why he has this extraordinary appeal to all of us, is that it's really Yahweh speaking through him in a very unique situation. But I have to believe the personality of Jesus is still there, and God took somebody who would be ideal for his vesicle to communicate to the earth, and in that combination, that's why Jesus is so impactful, and he's the most important human being who's ever walked the face of this earth because of that. He's transformed the world, and but of course there's the nemesis, and that's what we're also dealing with in history. Okay, all right. So I think that solves. I hope Marty, I finally answered it, and I hope that helps everybody else. Okay, God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.